just showed. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Vijay Reddy, who's at, let me make sure. Okay. To Vijay Reddy, who's at Mayfield Ventures. And Vijay, take it away.
Hey, thank you all for having me on this webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Sheng and Win. So Guru is not joining us, so it'll be me representing Mayfield. Before I introduce Sheng and Win, maybe I'll just introduce a little bit about myself and the firm. So I'm a partner at Mayfield Fund. We're based in Menlo Park. Over 55 years, we've backed more than 550 companies. And over this period of time, we've been able to see internet, the cloud, mobile, and now AI. And as we look across these different waves, I think one thing has been constant across multiple tech waves, right? Which has been open standards and open governance have always been the catalyst for massive adoption, right? And we have invested across open source and open infrastructure with HashiCorp, with Rancher for Kubernetes, with Influx Data, and we are the founder of Rancher on the call as well. And what we've seen is interoperability has unlocked scale massively, but trust unlocks value also to a larger extent, right? Just like HTTP to HTTPS, and we went from containers to Kubernetes. So I want to bring in two speakers who embody this open ecosystem. One is Sheng, and the other is Vin Sharma from Vigil. Maybe I'll start with Sheng and Vin. If you can introduce yourself, maybe talk a little bit about your backgrounds and why you're building what you're building. That'll be a good start.
Yeah, hi, I'm Shen Liang. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Acorn Labs and one of Mayfield's portfolio companies. I work with Mayfield for through multiple companies. My last company, Rancher Labs, was in the Kubernetes ecosystem, and we built open source software, to manage Kubernetes clusters. And once we started Acorn Labs, it was very clear that AI is going through the same kind of AI infrastructure space is going through the same kind of development and offers the same opportunities. So that's what we're working on. Naturally, we're into agents, agent infrastructure, trusting agents, authentication, MCP A2A. So those are very near and dear to us.
My name is Vin. I'm the co-founder CEO of Vigil. Before this, I was building the deep learning platform for Amazon SageMaker at AWS, and at Intel built the deep learning platform for Intel and BMW's collaboration on self-driving cars. And that's kind of when this seed idea of working on agents, and specifically agents in what you might consider life-critical, mission-critical, business-critical environments, as a self-driving car would be, came to my mind, and it's been seeded since then and planted grew over the past 10 years to something that I felt like now is the time when agents aren't only limited to certain environments and certain use cases, but are proliferating across a variety of applications and domains. But the single most important problem still remains that of being able to trust the autonomy and the agency of an agent. And so for us, trust means something very specific at Vigil, and we're working to enable that in agents built with any framework and deployed on any runtime environment. So you can kind of think of it as a tool chain to first validate the trustworthiness of an agent. It fits neatly into the concept of the registry. So I'm really looking forward to extending that, being able to carry forward notions not only of the identity of an agent, but also its reliability, security, and safety, and use that to enable agents to be deployed in mission critical environments. So that's what we do at Vigil. I'm looking forward to this. Vijay, we can't hear you.
Sheng, I'll start with you, Sheng. You've been at
Yeah.
the forefront of the Kubernetes movement, right? And you mentioned that there's a lot of parallels between what we saw then and what we're seeing with agents. Can you talk a little bit about what are the parallels? How do you see this ecosystem evolving? And where do you see the big opportunities and bottlenecks?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything kind of tend to repeat itself, except it gets bigger and bigger. In the Kubernetes days, a lot of folks were developing web applications, mobile applications, and they kind of needed a way to scale these applications. AI is much, much earlier. AI-enabled applications, AI-native applications are, really just getting started, and clearly there's all kinds of analogy of what's going to be the Kubernetes for AI things like A2A, things like MCP, and those kind of things got brought up. To be honest, right now it's probably a little too early to be talking about that yet, because if personally, I'm a lot more concerned about just still producing useful agents. I think to be fair, outside of coding agents and a few vertical agents like customer support, we're still not seeing the long tail of these horizontal or vertical agents that are useful, that go beyond a demo or a proof of concept. So I think personally, I'm not too concerned. I'm certainly not waiting for a Kubernetes a moment to happen. It will happen, but right now I think we just gotta prove that that agents could actually be effective and useful beyond coding and beyond building customer support chatbots. So that's that at least is what I'm mostly worried about right now.
And when anybody can go and wipe code an agent right now, maybe you can talk to and get an agent out, but there's a big difference between creating a demo agent or a demo to actually go into production, right? So you mentioned about trust. Can you unpack what trust means, and what do you think of trust when you talk about autonomous agents?
Yeah, so I think it's a convenient fiction to pretend that agents are like employees in an organization. It's useful, right, for us to pretend that. And I think if we extend that analogy further, then you have to look at how you hire an employee into an organization, particularly if it's in a role that has some real consequence. In other words, they're making decisions and taking actions that could materially affect the outcomes of the organization. When you hire an employee like that, you do a fair bit of testing, both directly and indirectly through their reputation and their referrals and their network of previous, work history and accomplishments to determine if this employee would be a good fit into your organization. We think that that is the right starting point to also imagine bringing agents into your organization in a mission critical or business critical role. And you have to be able to test an agent to be able to trust an agent. So our first principle was we should have adequate testing for the trustworthiness of an agent. And obviously that means being able to define trust in a way that is quantifiable, because you have to be able to do this automatically at scale with millions, billions, trillions of agents. So for us, that ability to test the capabilities of the agent, the identity of the agent seems like a precondition, but the capabilities and the behavior, and ultimately, given access to the source code, the internal composition and the components of the agent seem like important domains or scope of the testing. So that's what we started out doing at Vigil. About a year and a half ago, we started by thinking of it not just as LLM evaluations or red teaming or QA, but to compose those various practices within the context of an agent development lifecycle into a test-driven development methodology for agents. So you aren't just vibe coding your way to a potential fit, but actually consciously applying well-trodden software engineering and secure by design principles into the development of the agent. What that means to us fundamentally when we define it as, again, if you're employing an agent in a mission critical role, it needs to be able to perform as expected under diverse conditions, not just ideal inputs that are within the training data set of the LLM that it's based on, but obviously out of distribution, maybe variations or perturbations of those inputs. Then you have to be able to test whether the agent behaves as expected under hostile conditions. Maybe the other agents in the environment or users of that environment aren't just nice. They could be noisy, they could be nosy, or they could be nasty. And so we test for noise, essentially malice, and produce conditions that allow the agent to maintain its integrity, maintain its confidentiality and availability under those conditions. Sooner or later, we're going to see attackers, whether agentic or human, with sufficient sophistication and malice to actually compromise the agent. And when that happens, does the agent fail gracefully? Does it degrade to a point where it causes the minimal risk to its environment, to other agents in the system, and to the users? And that to us is kind of how we define safety within the organization enterprise context. So it sort of escapes the concerns around existential risk and grounds it very specifically in what concerns an organization when it looks at innovation over risk. And so to us, safety means being able to contain an agent. So containers, not just kind of in a software resource grouping standpoint, but containment in the sense of being able to limit the scope of the agent to only what it is supposed to do and not what it could do. So just because an agent's capable of answering your medical questions doesn't mean that it should. If it's employed as a financial consultant or a financial assistant, you shouldn't expect it to answer medical questions. So containment is important, transparency is important, and ultimately compliance with the policies, the regulations, and the laws of the land seem like very important concerns to ensure for an agent. So this very long-winded answer to your question, but to us is a full range or a taxonomy of trust that we think is underappreciated in the way that agents are being built and deployed today.
So I'll change gears a little bit, Win, and come back to the enterprise adoption of agents, right? So Sheng, we talked earlier in the webinar, right? I think Ramesh brought this up, that the cloud evolved very differently from the mobile, where you had in the mobile, there was just few players having walled gardens, versus in the cloud, it was a little bit more open. And in AI, arguably, there's a semblance of openness, but it's actually some few large cloud providers. And for agents to work, how do you see this? Does need to be an open ecosystem? Are we going to run the risk of walled gardens? I mean, going back to Kubernetes days, right? What is the best way for all of us to move forward?
Yeah. I mean, my career has been defined with building open source software. So I have a natural inclination towards open source and open. But I have to recognize I don't think one model is necessarily superior to the other. Even if you go back, like it's the iPhone versus Android kind of argument, right? Android is more open, clearly. And if you go back to the cloud space, Amazon being the ultimate innovator and first mover. I mean, I think in the beginning, at least, certainly wasn't perceived as a particularly open vendor. It's definitely more like a walled garden. So both have I think both have merits, clearly. Today, we just from our company perspective and from the customers we've worked with, vast majority of AI-enabled applications today we see are built on OpenAI. So it just so happens, and as opposed to say Llama. So and I just maybe I conclude with a very concrete example of sort of innovation versus openness. I got into this agent space back in December 2023, I think, when OpenAI announced function calls, and that was just remarkable. I didn't know models could do that, and I think that's kind of what enabled all of us to be here. And then together with that, they announced a custom GPT store, which frankly has been far less successful. I mean, that is a war garden in every way, and it just hasn't. It's almost like I think it'll be remembered as the earliest effort in AI to build like iTunes store or something. So it still looked very early, a year and a half later. But then you can kind of compare that with MCP, which happened maybe 6 months ago, and it's certainly quite a bit more open. And it's probably still not completely open, but it's quite a bit more open. And it's not an exact clone certainly not a clone of GPT Store by any means, right? And it's just the momentum it gets is quite remarkable. So you can kind of see the interesting interaction between walled garden and openness there.
And when if you assume a world, hopefully, which is more open than closed, right? Who is in the best situation to go build all the layers of trust? Are these the model companies? Are these the cloud providers? Are there going to be startups or other open source initiatives to go build, like you said, identity provenance and guarantees and so on?
So I think it's both. It's a T-shaped problem, and it's T-shaped in the sense that there's kind of a chain of trust that propagates across the network of agents, and so there's reputation of the agents working with each other and with humans, and that then means that you have to be able to record at least a history of these transactions and the performance along the trust axis of those transactions. So you can imagine that maybe in a centralized network, this would take the form of a certificate authority that assures all other participants in this ecosystem or the network that an agent is trusted. So I see some of those ideas being recapitulated within the agentic framework. But there's also, in a decentralized network, the notion that the agents themselves, through consensus protocols, establish the trustworthiness of any new entrant into the network and the ecosystem. And I think that that is worth pursuing. So there's a lot of innovation opportunities for startups and for established vendors to look at this construct of an internet of agents in a new way as potential for novelty in the way we solve for problems that have historically been solved in a very centralized construct in the past. Then there's the vertical bar of the T that has to do with kind of the root of trust in what what you would consider, whether it's rooted in the hardware on which the agent is running, and this becomes particularly important when agents go to the edge and have to preserve privacy, even in a open hostile environment. We think that there's layers of the stack that are in that horizontal ordering where you could consider the hardware and the confidential computing environment as providing a layer of trust, above which there's the foundation models themselves, which again, today, if you took the kind of very evocative metaphor of the foundation model being the operating system for agents, then why isn't there a trusted operating system? Why are open models without the source code available or the training recipes available trustworthy, in the sense that you see you have transparency into the workings of the model? So we see an opportunity for there being open source models, not just open weight models, providing the transparency and the trustworthiness. And I think that that's a real place to innovate. And then above that is the orchestration and the tooling layer that allows the discoverability of agents that have been trusted, haven't just been verified because they say who they say they are, but also because they do what they are supposed to do and not anything beyond that. And so I think those are opportunities that we at Vigil are particularly focused on, those relating to the behavior of the agents, the composition of the agents, and the mandatory access control policies that drive those behaviors and the composition. So that's the place that we think we can add the most value. We're building tools to make this easy for people to test agents. We built a very scalable testing capability that lets you figure out if the agent is trustworthy within minutes by running up to 100,000 different test prompts, some of which are prompt injections and jailbreaks, some of which are ethical tests and code of conduct tests based on the policies of the organization. So it's a pretty wide spectrum of analysis here on a given agent before you consider it trustworthy. But anyway, beyond that, I do think that being able to deploy these agents in mission critical applications is where a lot of the value is. And as Sheng was saying earlier, we're still in the very early days of seeing vertical AI agents that do business critical, mission critical tasks.
Thanks, Wayne. Sheng, we had the CTO of Dell talk about how there's more data within Dell than everything out there, right? And for an enterprise trying to get agents into production or for critical use cases, it looks like we're living in two different worlds right now, right? Where the consumer, they can go knock themselves crazy with agents to agents communicating, but enterprises, when it comes to that, there's a lot of infrastructure that's needed to go build it to make it production worthy. What are you seeing? How are you seeing enterprises adopt?
Yeah, I mean, I see maybe a slightly different perspective because as you know, someone who has to run a small business and stay alive and find repeatable patterns, my experience is probably my perspective is probably quite different, a lot more paranoid. The I mean, I think there's no doubt AI is getting real adoption, in content generation, notes taking, chats, all kinds of stuff, right? Adding features, recommendation engine, anything you could think of. But I think I think when it comes to enterprise agents or business agents, the type of agents that can alleviate, that can make work more productive. Again, I said beyond a few verticals like coding and customer support, it's just been quite a struggle, to be honest. When I think in some sense the hype is kind of gone much faster than the reality. And when I first got into agents, we spent about a year trying to build these IT ops, DevOps agents, because that's the space we came from, and we just couldn't build anything that's beyond the demo that would actually make that we would be willing to use ourselves. And then since then we pivoted more to if we can't build it ourselves, then we help other people build. So because they hopefully understand their domain better, or their domain is easier. So that's why I always feel that enterprise is in much better position right now because the tools are available. I mean, the tool space is way overbuilt. All kinds of agent tools. I mean, we barely have any agents running, and we're already talking about how these agents should work together. Like we're like way ahead of ourselves in every way. So I would always encourage. It really these days it really doesn't take very much to build an agent, build a chatbot, and we're talking. I mean, you can vibe code the whole thing in a few hours. So just the important thing is, does it actually work well enough that you would use it? So I think that's exactly where we are. Next year or two will be critical to see if this stuff will be real.
And when you are selling into mission critical enterprises, right? And you're probably on the other end of the spectrum in terms of how hard it is to get agents into production. So how do enterprises take what they learned, for example, today with A2A or MCP, and if they want to bring it into production, what needs to be done before they can actually adopt some of these agents into production?
How they take it is with a large grain of salt. And I think what we need to do is to be able to distinguish between agents that you can throw over the wall and iterate very quickly with feedback from consumers that don't necessarily have a lot at stake with the success of the agent's capabilities or the behavior, versus agents in banking, insurance, healthcare, um, HR, legal, not to mention energy and defense applications, where you cannot deploy the agent until it has met very serious and specific requirements of reliability, security, and safety. So I think that that to me feels like a necessary governance mechanism over the innovation that agents represent, the ability to automate decision making and action in an environment with feedback loops fundamentally. So I think it's the right thing for enterprises to have almost a drag or a braking function over this process. So you have awareness and a responsible AI approach to the development and deployment of these capabilities. So I, for one, welcome the slowness of pace at some level in the enterprises that are being more thoughtful and considering the risks before they deploy an agent into production. It's the right thing to do. I don't think we should be testing self-driving cars in public, and I think you should not be testing financial agents in public with consumer feedback before it's validated with the rigor.
I think we're out of time here, but there's so many more questions, Sheng and Wen. The takeaway for me is agents we're at an inflection point. We're going to see a massive adoption of agents. I think MCP and A2A are just really good steps in the right direction. But between that and going into production, there's a trust layer that needs to be met with, and there needs to be an infrastructure that needs to be built on top of these frameworks to make it production worthy, right? And that takes time, that takes a lot of engineering effort, and enterprises are either going to build it themselves or going to adopt startups or open source frameworks. So Ramesh, any other questions for this group?
This is fantastic. Thank you, Shengling, and thank you, Vin Sharma. What a fascinating conversation. And, to realize that some of the early API conversations and microservices conversations have moved to agents. So I think, Vijay, one risk is just as, everybody changed their LinkedIn profile, going back 20 years, they say, oh, in 2000, 2001, I was working in AI, which is kind of surprise to me. I think we're going to probably have a whole new generation that says, I started working on agents in 2005, going backwards. So I wonder if there's going to be like this whole turnover where we're going to start calling APIs and function calls and microservices as just agents.
Yeah, remember chatbots was cool in 2015?
That's
And you don't
right.
talk about chatbots anymore.
It's coming by, and command line interfaces are cool again as well. So that's fascinating. Thank you so much, Vijay, and thank you, panelists.
Thank you all.